Hey guys, how's it going? Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to give you a quick update on where the system's at now. I know it's been about a month since I posted. Before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's episode. So at the end of the last episode, solar powered AC, I thought that I had a faulty low voltage cutoff switch in this inverter, but I remembered when I stepped back and thought about it for a while that I've had problems with these Victron battery protects before. I ended up having to run two of them in parallel because they restrict the amperage flow, and it was strange because I was still getting a reading of 12.5 volts off the back of this inverter, but it was going into low voltage cutoff, and it's because while the voltage was good, the amperage coming through these was just not sufficient to run the inverter. So I disconnected the battery protect. I'm running all the power through a 4-aught cable straight from the batteries to the inverter, and it's running like a champ. Because we no longer have a low voltage cutoff in between our batteries and our inverter, I'm back to using a timing switch and just setting it to run for about 15 minutes an hour, and that keeps the car charger from discharging those batteries down too much and over discharging the batteries and damaging them that way. So it's been running real good. I've put 1,400 solar powered miles on this thing now, which is it's a long way from paying for itself, which is the ultimate goal, of course. I want this vehicle to pay for itself and what I would have spent on gas, and I'm still a long way away from that. But 1,400 miles is a pretty nice milestone. It's cool that I've been able to drive it that far on basically just sunlight. But the days are getting shorter now. It's October, and the batteries, both in the car and the ones in the trunk, don't hold as much charge when they get cool. So this vehicle was getting about 45 miles of maximum range in the summertime, and now when I wake up in the morning and it's 50 degrees outside, the maximum range of the vehicle is down to 35 miles. And we are only getting about 17 to 20 miles out of the solar panels and the backup batteries in the trunk for a total of 55 miles. And my commute's 50, so as the days get shorter and colder, this system is basically, we're going to have to add some more power if I want to be able to drive this thing through the winter. How am I going to add panels to it? We're out of any big chunks of real estate on the vehicle. The roof, the hood, those are all taken. So I'm going to look at some methods that other people have used and see if I can emulate any of those, or maybe tweak and modify other people's methods to find something that'll work for this car. The current record for the most solar power anybody's been able to put on a mass-produced EV is Dan McGuire up in Canada. I'm going to put a few pictures of his system up here. Dan has managed to add a jaw-dropping 2,100 watts of solar to his vehicle through a combination of putting an aluminum truss on the top of the vehicle, so he can add more panels than he would be able to fit using just the skin of the vehicle, and making his own panels. You can tell that one around the front grille there is obviously not something he bought from a store. He made that custom, and we'll talk more about how to do that later in this video. But you can see that that truss really gives him a lot more real estate along the top of the vehicle to add panels than he would have gotten if he would have just attached them directly to the skin of the vehicle. Also, as he goes around to the back of it, you will see that he has a slide right back there that allows another panel to slide out from the back of that assembly. So that's an idea that I'm going to emulate too. Is this system overkill with all of these panels? Well, here in Texas, that would get you about 60 to 70 miles a day in the summer with just solar on the car, which does seem like a little overkill. Very few people drive an average of 60 miles a day. But you've got to consider that up there in Canada, the sunlight is not as direct and the days are a little shorter. So Dan had to go all out to get this system to work at his latitude. If you lived somewhere cooler and near the equator, like I'm talking to a guy in Singapore who's thinking about doing this to his EV, you would get a lot more efficiency than even here in Texas. I told him that if he built the exact same system that I have on my Leaf, he could probably get about 10 to 15% better efficiency
just because the sunlight is more direct at the equator, and the temperature is a lot more mild, so he's not going to have to expend any energy fighting the elements to try and keep the car, you know, cooler in the summertime. Thank you, Dan, for allowing me to use your video as an explanatory aid, and I will post a link to his channel down in the description of this video. Okay, now let's take a look at one more solar-powered car before we get back to our build. This is my buddy T. Shinoki, and I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. It's Nissan Leaf, which he has also opted to add a solar panel charging option to. He has used the roof rack method to attach two 200-watt solar panels to the roof of his vehicle. This gives you two really important benefits. One is it allows you a lot more space to add those panels on. You can probably add 30% larger panels by adding them onto the roof rack than you would be able to by attempting to attach them directly to the skin of the vehicle. Number two is it lifts those panels off the skin of the vehicle. Those panels can get very hot in the summertime, especially if you live somewhere warm. Up to 160, 170 degrees is not uncommon for the surface of these solar panels. And that heat's going to radiate down into the car if you have those panels attached directly to the surface of it. And inside the car we have, of course, our batteries, our charge controller, our inverter, all those electronic components that you want to keep cool. And you don't want to spend a lot of your solar power powering an AC system kind of fighting to keep that heat out of the vehicle. So by putting those panels on the roof rack and lifting them off the skin of the vehicle, you help keep your vehicle shaded, you lift that hot component off the surface of it, and you also get airflow underneath those panels, which is going to help keep your panels cooler and help keep them functioning more efficiently and giving us as much power as we can get out of those. So even though you're out of pocket an extra, you know, $150 for your roof rack or so, I really think like it's a better method than trying to attach the panels directly to the skin of the vehicle. You just get a lot of benefits out of doing so. Thank you, Shinoki, for allowing me to use your content on my video, and I will post a link to his YouTube channel in the description below. So this is a 160 watt panel, which would give me 60% more power than the 100 watt panels that I'm using now, but it just doesn't quite fit on the surface of the vehicle. It hangs over the edge here, and there wouldn't really be a good way to secure it without using the roof rack. But if we put it on the roof rack, then we're covering up those two 100 watt panels that we have on there now. So the idea that occurred to me was, what if we could put these 260 watt panels on the roof rack, but put them on a kind of slide, so that when we're driving around they're fixed in this position, but if we park and we're going to be somewhere for 10 or 8-10 hours, an extended period of time, we can fold them out and get all the power that we would be getting from the 160 watt panels plus the now exposed 100 watt panels that are underneath them, bringing our total roof system up to 520 watts. The part that I want to try and use for this is a locking slide. So when it's all the way in, it won't move and it'll hold the panels, you know, on top of the vehicle where we want them. But when we park somewhere, we can fold it out and it'll lock like that too. But I realized that with these panels all the way extended out, they're going to hang a pretty good distance off of the vehicle, which could be a little bit of a hazard in a crowded parking lot. I'd be worried about somebody whipping in the space next to me at high speed, not really looking out for solar panels hanging off the edge of the car next to it, and rip it off the whole assembly. So the last little tweak that I'm going to try and add in there, putting these extendable hinges, extendable slides on a hinge, so that a locking hinge, so that I can lift the whole assembly up at about a 45-degree angle, and that should canter that panel up at an angle like that where it won't be a hazard to the vehicle that's parking next to me. And also, you know, if it's late in the afternoon, you can angle your panels and get the optimum angle for sunlight that way. So that's what I'm going to attempt to build today, a roof rack solar panel assembly on a sliding hinge. Okay, so we got the holes cut, measured and cut in our aluminum bar for where our bolts are going to go through. There's 2 holes for 2 bolts that are going to attach the solar panel to the bar, and 2 bolts that are going to attach the bar to the slide. Before we get this thing bolted on there and make it to a point where we can't really see or access any of this stuff anymore, any of the internals of the slide, I'm going to go ahead and put some grease on there, and this is going to help these ball bearings and other moving parts last as long as they can outside. Now we're going to add the bolts that are going to secure all this together. Okay, so there's what it'll look like after you get it sanded off. I put a little bit of super glue on the base of that nut and thread lock around the bolt, so I really think that should hold it secure. Alright, when the whole thing's fully assembled, it'll look like that. You've got your hinges down there at the bottom, your slide locks right there. From the top, most of that hardware is going to be invisible. And we're going to take that panel and lay it down on top of this roof rack here, so that that black hinge lines up with these 2 bolt holes right here, and this will be basically the way it hinges open like that. So when we fully deploy it, it'll go up at an angle and out away from anything that's going to be any other vehicles that'll be parked next to us. Okay, so this is what the roof rack looks like fully assembled on the ground. And when we get it on the vehicle, it looks like this right here. So I wasn't super happy with how the finished product came out looking. My plan was to attach one of these brackets and then kind of pull the other one forward far enough so that it would tighten these solar panels out and get them to hang, in a flat straight line. But as I found out, these roof rack attachments are not really designed to support against a force that is pulling them that way. They're more designed to anchor down and support, vertically downward weight. So if I were to do this again, and this won't be super hard for me to change, I will go back and attach another aluminum bar that runs underneath of this panel and give it that nice airfoil shape and make it look a little more professional and clean. The other issue is that when these panels fold all the way out, they've got to have enough give in that wire to allow them to move. And I couldn't really think of a good way I need like a spool or something that will retract that wire when the panel folds in and will feed it out when the panel folds out. I couldn't quite figure out a good way to do that. If anyone knows of a specific part that would serve that function well, please let me know. So when I need to fold the roof rack out, I can just loop the wires over the frame there, come around,
and voila, and it folds out.
So it works, but I want to remove as many steps as possible. I want to make this the kind of setup that after you park, it only takes you about 60 seconds to get the full thing deployed. And so for that reason, a little spool back there that would wind the wire up as these panels fold in will work a lot better than trying to loop the wire around the edge of the car rack frame over there. And that's something I'm going to look into as well. Issue number 3 was with the allegedly locking hinges that I used for this project. One thing I would change about these if I were to do it again is I would find a hinge that has a longer bracket here to attach to the roof rack, so I can fit more than just these 2 bolts in. Those 2 1/2-inch carriage bolts will hold this secure, but I would like more real estate to be able to anchor it in more than just one spot to that roof rack. But the real issue that I had with these was that these hinges lock on a kind of friction mechanism where you turn this lever right here and that tightens it, but it's tightening it just by putting a kind of squeezing friction on this hinge right here. And try as I might, I could not tighten that thing enough to get it to where it would hold this whole assembly out at a 45-degree angle. You would tighten them, deploy it like that, and it would slowly just kind of move downwards. So the part that we're going to have to use for this moving forward is a ratcheting hinge, which catches not based on friction, but actually on the like on a tightening ratchet that you would use. It clicks onto little indentations in the metal, and once it's in a locked in a position, it's not going anywhere. These little friction hinges just aren't gonna be up to the task of holding this assembly, even relatively light as it is, suspended out here at this angle. All right, on to our 4th and probably most severe issue. These roof racks, and pretty much every other one I could find, are designed to be attached in only very specific locations on the vehicle. These little clamps that go over the frame are designed to fit around the frame of the vehicle only in certain spots. And because we need to essentially widen where those roof racks are going to be enough to allow for a solar panel on there, they are now resting on parts of the vehicle that the manufacturer did not intend for them to rest on. So what we're left with is the fact that they don't fit completely flush the way they're supposed to. We get this little gap in between the hardware and the frame of the vehicle. So I'm going to have to go in, take these out, put them in my vise, and hammer this part in a little bit so that it will fit precisely on this vehicle. It's on there pretty secure now. I can grab it and I can shake the vehicle and it's not going anywhere. But just out of an abundance of caution, I'm going to go hammer this bracket in flush with the vehicle and maybe look into seeing if I can get somebody to weld this on there for me to make it extra secure. Okay, so that's it for all the little hitches and problems that we had. Now let's see if we can get it in the sunlight and see how it's doing with our new roof rack on there. Looks like it's jumping at around, settled in at right around 370 watts. In full sunlight with everything deployed on it. This is on a October afternoon, so you're getting about, I'd say, half of the amount of power from solar that you're going to be getting in July. I think the solar minimum occurs somewhere at around late December, early January, and peaks in late July. I'll see if I can throw up a chart of that happening. And so what is 370 watts turn into in terms of miles? So what does 370 watts turn into in terms of miles? How many miles of range is that 370 watts going to turn into? Well, we know that we get about 4.7 miles per kilowatt hour. Okay, so how many miles of range does 370 watts turn into? Well, 370 watts is just 0.37 kilowatt hours. So we know that our car gets 4.7 miles per kilowatt hour. So 0.37 kilowatt hours turns into 1.74 miles of range that we're getting per hour that it is in the sun. Now we're getting about 5 hours of sunlight a day right now at 1.74 miles of range per hour. Means that we're getting about 8.7 miles of range from just the solar right now in October. That comes out to about 60 miles a week in the winter. We'll see that number go up in the summer as the sunlight gets more direct and the days get longer. I think this figure right here, this 8.7 miles per day, might double in the summer. If we're using this system as just a range extender, which is what I'm using it for, then we're also carrying around, we're leaving the house with our battery bank in the back, our 4 batteries fully charged, and we can pull about 3 kilowatt hours out of that 4.8 total capacity without damaging those batteries that we have in the trunk right now. So we add that 3 kilowatt hours at 4.7 miles of range per kilowatt hour, and we get 14.1 miles of range that we carry around with us in those backup batteries, plus the 8.7 that we're getting from the solar, and we're up to right around 22.8 additional miles of range right now in October if we drain the backup batteries as well as use all the power that we get from our solar. Okay, so we're up to about almost 23 miles a day using our solar and our battery bank now, but we've still got these extra portions of real estate on the hood, the front bumper, the top and front of the panels here, and it would be a shame to let all that space go to waste. We saw that Dan in Canada had some custom panels that he could use to fill in these little gaps of space. So what were those about and how did he make them? So there are companies now where you can buy not only the whole panel but also the individual solar cells. These, when they're in the sunlight, act pretty much just like a battery. And just like how you can string 2 batteries together to double their voltage from 1.5 volts there to 3 volts, we can do the same thing with our solar cells. You can see that's about 0.6 volts right there. And if I string 2 of them together, that number goes up to about 1.2. So in order to charge our 12 volt batteries that we've got in the back that we're running our inverter off of, we have to string enough of these cells together to build up to about 16, 17, 18 volts. That's pretty much what all these solar panels provide, is around 18 volts. And while you have to string together too many cells to do that in a small area like this, we don't have to attach these using these little bars that come with them. You can just as easily run a wire from the end of one of these chains of cells over to another one. So we could set up 6 or 7 cells here, run a little wire over to the other ones, run 6 or 7 there,
and build our own custom panels that way that will fit on any portion of this vehicle. As long as they're all in the sunlight at the same time, it'll work. These things are also feather light. They're very flexible. And they've got a nice blue, a really cool blue color on them. I don't know if that'll come through on this camera or not, probably not. So, the only challenge, the only hurdle with using these is that these very fine electronic components here are not going to last long at all exposed to the elements. We'll have to find a way to encase these in a material that's going to protect them from moisture. They make materials for that. I'm still kind of learning and experimenting with what's going to work best for this method. But using that method of making our own custom solar panels, we can utilize the full skin of this vehicle, and that should allow us to add at least another 200 or 300 watts and bring the total wattage of the panels on this car up to somewhere around 1,000 watts. And that's going to get us into that 30 to 40 mile per day range that I was really looking for when I started this project out. Alright, that's all I got for today. Thank you guys for tuning in. I did want to throw in as an afterthought that I always considered the ability of this car to run things other than just a car charger, to run any appliance in your house and function as a kind of backup generator. I always saw that as a very kind of off to the sides benefit of the project. And then we had 9 tornadoes hit Dallas last weekend and knock power out to about 100,000 people, many of whom were without power for almost 4 days straight. That, coupled with all the power outages that I'm reading about every day in California, has kind of given me a new appreciation for how valuable it is to have, even if it's just 4 or 5 kilowatts a day, kind of in storage on tap. It's a side feature of the solar car that I never valued until I kind of had it rubbed in my face. When I'm driving through neighborhoods at work that have been without power for 3 or 4 days, it kind of really gave me a new appreciation for that function of the vehicle. So that was a side note that I wanted to tack on. Okay, future videos, we're going to do some on how to make your own custom panels, the best methods for encapsulating these little cells so that we can attach them to our vehicle and they'll last long. Might do a video on how to clean up the roof rack a little bit, and just continued longevity of all the parts in the system. Is anything breaking down, or is it making it through its, it's at about 1,650 miles right now. How's everything holding up when we hit that 2,000 mile mark, that 3,000 mile mark, the 10,000 mile mark? That's when the system really starts to pay for itself, when we're able to take this old EV that we couldn't even make it to work and back before, and make it last another 10,000 miles, another 20,000 miles. That's when this system really starts to pay for itself in savings. So that's what I got coming out in the next few months. Thanks you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.